Hello, Guy.
Hi, Patrick.
You and I go back a long way. I think back to the 80s.
Yeah, late 80s, I think.
Yeah, and you set up a co-op which was part of a supply system to provide vegetables for supermarkets. And then you, as I heard on Desert Island Discs, had this confrontation with a supermarket buyer, as a result of which you kind of walked out of the whole system and set up Riverford. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, no, that's fair and mostly true. Yeah, I never liked dealing with the supermarkets, and it did fairly quickly become intolerable for them and me, I think, probably.
Well, as you know, I carried on supplying supermarkets. I persisted until 2006, growing carrots and sending them eventually to Sainsbury's and Waitrose via the last pack house standing, which was in Peterborough, Produce World.
Yeah.
At which point it became economically impossible to make sense of it. So I gave up rather noisily with lots of attendant media coverage. But I think it's interesting that since I gave up growing vegetables, not willingly really, I've gone back, if you see it that way, to producing almost exclusively livestock products. And that provides a link to a conversation that we've been having for the last 5 or 10 years really, about the role of livestock in sustainable food systems. And we're sitting here at Oxford, and I've just heard John Meadley making the point that many of the world's richest soils were built through an interaction of ruminants and grass. And I've also heard Simon Fairley, who's you know very well, give a talk about his 10-acre system in Dorset. And he said that probably a third of the UK farmed area, maybe even more than that, is suitable for a kind of mixture of vegetable production and a crop rotation, a simple crop rotation involving fertility building and cropping, in his case an acre of vegetables a year and in future an acre of wheat. And I personally think that Simon Fairley's got it right, and I wondered what you thought about that.
I suppose I do find myself sitting in the middle of what, I'm sorry, Patrick, I do consider to be two extremes with you and and arguing for grazing livestock on one side, and George Monbiot and others arguing for cultured meat substitutes and rewilding and large areas of the UK, and I see virtues in both arguments. So as is so often the case, I think we should be aiming somewhere down the middle, and I do think there are large areas of uplands and very unproductive land which is being used for grazing livestock, which would deliver greater environmental benefits, both in terms of sequestering carbon but also supporting more diverse wildlife if it was effectively rewilded or forested. But I don't subscribe to rewilding significant areas of lowlands, and I would like to see a diverse countryside with probably smaller areas than George Monbiot would suggest of woodlands interspersed with pastures, mostly permanent pastures, grazing ruminants. We consume, I think, depends how you measure it, but about 1,600 grams of meat on average each in the UK a week. I think we have to cut that by probably 2/3 and get it down to 500 or 600 grams, which would be best for wildlife. I think it would offer opportunities for greater carbon sequestration. As I say, it would leave space for more wildlife, and it would probably be better for our health, actually, though I know that is a contentious point and probably one you don't agree with. But
well, you just mentioned George Monbiot, and I've seen his film, his
I haven't seen it yet.
Apocalypse Cow film, and in it he visits Ian Tolhurst, Tolly.
Right.
And of course he's massively impressed with Tolly's system, as are we all. But, and this is an important point arising out of what you've just said, when I was growing carrots, I found that the best way to grow carrots was 1 year in 7 of a 7-year rotation. And by the way, my farm is in the area that George would like to rewild. And he visited it in 2007 on the occasion of the launch of Transition Lambda. He came for supper in the dark, but he never stayed, so he hasn't seen my farm. But I think if he'd walked around it, he'd say, yeah, it's a prime candidate for rewilding. And yet, we might come to this. On my farm, I used to grow carrots, and I still grow
very successfully, I gather. But yeah, I mean, the reason I am not more outspoken in my condemnation of livestock is because I don't know how to farm without them. I mean, I really, I think they do. If we're not going to use chemical fertilizers, ammonium nitrate produced by burning fossil fuels, we are going to have to put fertility back on the land in another way. And traditionally, all our agricultural practice has been based on a sound rotation using grazing livestock, and we are trying very hard to make as much compost as we can from waste products locally and stuff that arrives on the farm, and it is astounding how much waste there is which should go back on the land and doesn't. So I think we should do all of that, but even having done that, there is not enough organic matter around for us all to farm like Ian Tolhurst does, or we do.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think there is an argument for grazing livestock, but a lot less of it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that point, because it's clear to me that Ian Tolhurst and Peter Seger and Anne Evans, who farm just down the road from us, as you well know, are both producing vegetables and fruit from more or less a stockless system. In Peter's case, he has a few sheep on the land, but they both import where they can organic matter, including wood chip. And in Peter's case, I don't know if Tolly does this too, but they mow their fertility building pastures, which are about 2/3 of the land area of their holding, and compost that. But for, as you've just said, for more extensive farmers, of which I am one, I think realistically you have to rely on a crop rotation with a fertility building phase, and arguably you need to turn that into something that people can eat and we can make money out of.
I have to concede that is the case, unless we can. Well, I'm not going to advocate using ammonium nitrate on the land. So where is the fertility going to come from? Largely speaking, from grazing livestock. But unfortunately, why I say less, because if you walk into a shop, a supermarket, or even a good butcher's, and you won't find much genuinely grass-fed beef anyway, or dairy. I mean, I'm guessing half the calories, probably more than half the calories used to produce a litre of milk come from grain and soya. And probably more,
And the fact that we can't differentiate between the grass-fed animal products and the non-grass-fed.
So if you're a member of the public and you don't want to eat that stuff that's contributing to deforesting the Amazon, and then really unless you can find pasture-fed livestock with accredited stuff, you're only the only thing you can do is stop eating it, really.
Yes. Except that, as you've just said, if you rely mainly, but not exclusively, on farming systems which have a fertility building phase, which is pasture.
But how do you know, as a customer, that that's what you're buying?
Well, we don't. I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that we have a major challenge here, because I'm talking now to hundreds of farmers, directly and indirectly, throughout the UK, who all know in their heart of hearts that their farming practices have been unsustainable for my farming lifetime, so the post-war period. And they know that they would like to farm in a more sustainable way, but they look at the systems of farming they would have to adopt in order to do that, namely adopt a crop rotation, the fertility building phase, and then run it down with a succession of arable crops. And they think, well, hang on a minute, the fertility building phase, the clover and grass, is going to need ruminant livestock. The market for lamb and beef is on the floor because everybody thinks the right thing to do is to give up eating red meat. But if you and I understand that, then surely it's up to people like us, because you're a hugely effective communicator through your growing customer network, to help people discern between the livestock which are part of the solution and those which we both agree are part of the problem. At the moment you can't do that.
You can't do that, and I'm afraid to say even organically certified milk is often produced using quite a lot of concentrates, i.e. grain and soya usually, which is something that I feel, uncomfortable with, let's say.
Yeah, well, in my dairy herd, we do buy about half the concentrate feed, because we do feed some grain products to our cows, but we don't buy concentrates with soy in, for the reasons that you would agree. But one of the issues, of course, arising from all this discussion is how we develop a labelling system and scheme which enables people to differentiate between the right and the wrong products in terms of sustainability. And the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association is saying unless it's 100% grass-fed, it can't be labelled like that. But my exceedingly delicious cheese is produced by dairy cows that do eat a partly concentrate ration. We're trying to grow it on the farm, and that's, with dairy cows it's hard to do it grass-fed.
Well, the world, there's been many, labels that have tried to paint a particular product as being more sustainable than another. The supermarkets have had their various labels, most of which have failed and been discredited, and generally marketing does work much better on absolute, so I can completely see why the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association will say just forage, and I don't know, I think it is achievable actually. I mean, it would take a long time. I believe do you have jerseys or Ayrshires? Ayrshires. Yeah, pretty hard with an Ayrshire to not feed them any concentrates, I imagine. Yeah.
There are farmers moving in that direction, and I think we want to move in that direction. But I think the issue, it's interesting you mentioned that, extremes are good from the point of view of consumer understanding.
Absolutes, I said.
Absolutes, okay. But cut-off points. But then you've just criticised, say, organic standards because there are some organic dairy cows that are fed some soy. So
it's we don't live in a perfect world, do we? I mean, we have to compromise, but everyone compromises. But I'm just saying compromises are a hard sell from a marketing perspective, because as soon as you start saying, we feed grass except, you start sounding like a Weasley politician that no one's going to trust. And
so what do you think the best way forward? Because you brought this up, that it's very hard to differentiate between livestock products which are genuinely necessary for a sustainable farming system building soil fertility and those which aren't. And you kind of implied, well, it's just too difficult, so don't buy them. And yet your vegetables, quite a lot of them, depend on the livestock to build the soil fertility.
It's true. I mean, we do bring in manure from largely stables actually. And some kind of extensive beef producers, which we would struggle with. I don't, none of them are fed GM rations, but they would probably, some of them, be fed some concentrates.
But are your customers interested? I mean, most of them are buying mainly vegetables, but how interested are they in the livestock issue? And do they expect you to take a sort of, cut and dried approach towards this?
Well, I think we're in quite a fortunate position in that Riverford's customers tend to be quite engaged and kind of thinking people, which I would say is quite unusual these days, and with a longer than average attention span, which can sustain and absorb some quite complex arguments. So I think we can provide a kind of nuanced argument for them that it's not a black and white issue. That's much harder if you're trying to communicate with your customers through a tiny little label on a shop shelf, or indeed through the Daily Mail. To get a thoughtful argument across is much more difficult. Yeah.
But if we are in the position, as we now are, whatever we think of Brexit, in redesigning our carrots and sticks, which incentivise or disincentivise farmers, then it's an amazing opportunity to produce a set of policy instruments which reward practices which build soil fertility, which avoid chemical fertilisers, increase biodiversity, increase diversity of agricultural cropping. That could equally be applied to the uplands, which the Welsh government are grappling with at the moment, to the lowlands. So surely, our collective influence on how we increase the profitability of farming systems which do deliver public goods is very important right now.
Yeah, and of course, unfortunately, DEFRA like to pay by simple metrics. The area of cultivatable land and what's grown on it. I mean, the sort of nuances of whether it is a highly complex mixed sward, broken up with areas of small areas, spinneys of woodland and so on. That there is, so far, their policies seem to be far too blunt to encompass the sort of subtleties of what makes up a rich and diverse environment. Let alone how you're going to monitor and carbon sequestration.
You may know about this, but one of the projects which the SFT, the Sustainable Food Trust, is currently working on is the development of a harmonised framework for farm sustainability assessment, one of which would be agricultural and non-agricultural biodiversity. And the Welsh Government is showing a lot of interest in this, and they believe that annually all farmers that are becoming eligible for public money after the Brexit thing happens should have to complete an annual audit of their sustainability outcomes, and one of them, of course, would be pasture diversity. Then that gives rise to the question, how would you measure pasture diversity? And our current thinking is that maybe you can photograph a metre of sward, and you can get a satellite navigation thing to say where you do it randomly, and then you can do a species count, probably using artificial intelligence these days, to see what actually arises, and that would be a shift towards an outcome-based farming. As we could do with soil carbon.
Of course, everything you measure, sorry to be so bit despondent about it, but everything you measure and reward will distort.
Yes,
you will then have a whole bunch of farm consultants who are expert at extracting the maximum, and then, probably if you're just going to measure diversity, probably you're introducing some of the diversity that perhaps we don't want to see. So I really hope that you can manage it, Patrick, and I'm sure you don't underestimate the challenges, because what most farmers want is something relatively simple.
Yes.
I mean, they don't want to be spending hours administering this thing, and
no. But I think I think you're absolutely right that outcome versus practice is the issue. So you could say, don't do this and we'll pay you, or do this and we'll pay you, or we could say, if you deliver more soil organic matter, we'll pay you more, and if you don't, we'll pay you less. Probably there's going to be a fusion of the two for exactly the reasons that you describe. What we are doing is trying to create a framework where your farmers and farmers who are operating in my world, which is more livestock, can both complete this audit and deliver help to make sure that the farmers of the future deliver better public good outcomes.
I mean, and it should be locally based, because agricultural practices, good agricultural practice on the fens or in East Anglia would be very different to good agricultural practices, in Devon on a hillside. I think in Devon we should be focusing on particularly on hedgerow management, on getting more trees in fields and so on. Perhaps East Anglia they don't have hedges, so it should be locally based. And I think we do have, I'm definitely a Remainer, but I think we do have a better chance of achieving that outside the EU. So there may be a silver lining there.
Well, in the interests of promoting relationships between farmers who farm in different regions, I'll come and see you in 2020, and you must come and. Have you been to my farm?
I haven't actually. No, I don't.
So I think it's time for me to extend an invitation.
Probably is.
So come see us, and we'll discuss biodiversity, soil carbon, other vital issues during the coming year.
I'll look forward to it, Patrick.
Thanks for talking to me.
Thank you.